My stepfather disinherited me and kicked me out of the house. But when I suddenly inherited $8 million from my grandmother, they wanted to claim their $2 million share. So they sued me. When Mom first told me she was dating someone, I tried to be supportive. She'd been through a lot raising me alone after Dad left when I was little. But John was intense. He moved into our house almost immediately, bringing his son, Mark, along. Mark and I didn't click from day one. He was smug, always acting like he was better than me. John was worse, always criticizing everything I did, from the way I dressed to how I spoke. The first major blow came about 2 weeks after they moved in. Mom sat me down and told me my room was going to become a nursery for their new baby. I was stunned. First, I didn't even know Mom was pregnant. Second, my room was my sanctuary. I decorated it with fairy lights, posters of my favorite bands, and bookshelves filled with everything I loved. Losing it felt like losing a part of myself. "I'm sorry, sweetie," Mom said, looking genuinely apologetic. But John stood in the background, arms crossed, looking like he couldn't care less. "You'll move into the guest room," he said, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "It's smaller, but it's just temporary." Temporary. That word would haunt me for years. The guest room was basically a glorified closet, cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a window that barely opened. I tried to argue, but John shut me down. "You're being selfish," he snapped. "Your little brother will need space, and you're old enough to handle a little change." Things only got worse from there. Mark took every opportunity to make my life miserable. He'd accidentally spill juice on my homework or blast his music when I was studying. Once, he even locked me out of the house in the rain as a joke. I tried telling Mom, but she was so caught up in her new marriage and preparing for the baby that she didn't see it, or didn't want to. John, on the other hand, seemed to take Mark's side on everything. If Mark did something wrong, John would twist it to make it my fault. One time, Mark broke a vase in the living room. I wasn't even home when it happened, but John still blamed me, saying I must have left it in a dangerous spot. When Liam was born, things hit a new low. Everyone doted on him like he was a little prince. Meanwhile, I was expected to pick up the slack. I became the unofficial babysitter, changing diapers, feeding him, and rocking him to sleep while Mark got off scot-free. One night, I overheard John and Mom arguing in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the thin walls. "She's lazy," John said. "She needs to pull her weight around here." "She's a teenager, John," Mom replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "She needs to grow up. I'm not going to let her sit around while we're working our asses off." The next morning, Mom handed me a list of chores that made me feel like Cinderella. Dishes, laundry, vacuuming, and of course, taking care of Liam. Mark's name wasn't on the list at all. When I pointed this out, John smirked. "Mark has school sports," he said, as if that explained everything. "So do I." I shot back. "Don't raise your voice at me, young lady," he barked. "You'll do as you're told." By the time I turned 15, I barely recognized my life. My grades started slipping because I was too exhausted to focus on school. I didn't have time for friends anymore. Not that they'd understand. Who would? I felt like a prisoner in my own home. One day, I hit my breaking point. Mark had borrowed my laptop without asking and somehow managed to get it locked with a virus. When I confronted him, he just shrugged. "Maybe you shouldn't have such a crappy computer," he said with a smirk. I saw red. I marched straight to Mom and John and told them what happened, expecting some kind of justice. Instead, John turned it around on me again. "You shouldn't leave your stuff lying around," he said. "Mark didn't mean to do any harm." "That's not the point," I shouted, tears welling up in my eyes. "He always gets away with everything." "Stop being so dramatic," John snapped. And Mom? She just stood there, silent. After that, I stopped trying. I went through the motions, doing the chores, taking care of Liam, and avoiding Mark as much as possible. But deep down, I was seething. I wanted out, but where could I go? Dad was out of the picture, and I didn't have any other family nearby. I felt completely trapped. The only bright spot was school, though even that wasn't much of an escape. I started spending more time at the library, pretending to study so I wouldn't have to go home right away. One day, A teacher, Mrs. Carter, noticed I wasn't myself and asked if everything was okay. I wanted to spill everything, but I couldn't. What would I even say? I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile. But I wasn't fine. Not even close. Hey, Reddit, it's Emma again. Thanks for the support on my last post. It helped more than I expected. This time, I want to talk about how I became invisible in my own home. Living with John, Mark, and now Liam didn't just make me feel out of place. It was like they actively wanted me to know I didn't belong. It wasn't just subtle favoritism, it was blatant. John made sure his sons were on a pedestal, while I was left scrambling for scraps of attention. The alienation started small, almost like a game of, let's see how far we can push Emma. John always praised Mark and Liam for every little thing they did. If Mark scored a goal at soccer practice, John made it sound like he'd won the World Cup. If Liam said his first word or took a wobbly step, John would light up like a proud dad on a sitcom. But when I brought home straight A's on my report card, he barely glanced at it. Good for you, he'd mutter, before turning to Mark. Did you see the game last night? We should try that new move we talked about. It stung. I wanted to shout, I'm here too. I exist. But I learned early on that no one cared to listen. Even Mom, who used to be my biggest cheerleader, had started mirroring John's behavior. She'd smile politely when I shared an accomplishment but didn't seem invested anymore. It was like she'd switched teams, and I wasn't on hers anymore. Dinners became a special kind of torture. At first, they were just awkward. John dominated the conversation, gushing over Mark's achievements or Liam's baby milestones. But soon, I started noticing something worse. Family dinners started happening without me. One night, I came home from studying late at the library. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, and I heard laughter from the dining room. When I walked in, the table was set for 4. John, Mom, Mark, and Liam were all sitting there, laughing like they were in a Norman Rockwell painting. Except there was no chair for me. Am I interrupting? I asked, standing in the doorway. Mom looked startled, like she'd forgotten I existed. Oh, Emma, I didn't realize you'd be home so late. It's 7:30, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not late. John didn't even look up from his plate. We didn't think you'd want to eat with us, he said, his tone dismissive. You usually do your own thing. I wanted to scream. Instead, I went to my room and cried. From then on, I started eating dinner alone more often than not. They didn't even try to include me. It wasn't just neglect, it felt deliberate. Then there were the conflicts, and by conflicts, I mean the times when Mark went out of his way to make my life hell. Once, I caught him rummaging through my stuff. I had saved up babysitting money to buy myself a set of watercolor paints, a rare treat, and found them scattered across the floor, brushes bent and bristles ruined. What the hell, Mark? I yelled, holding up a ruined brush. He just smirked. It's just paint, Emma. Chill out. I stormed downstairs to tell Mom and John, but John waved me off. Boys will be boys, he said, like that excused everything. And girls will be furious. I shot back. He ruined something I paid for with my own money. John narrowed his eyes. Watch your tone, young lady. I turned to Mom, desperate for backup, but she just shook her head. Emma, let's not make a big deal out of this. Not make a big deal. That was the last straw. I stomped back upstairs, feeling utterly defeated. The unfairness was suffocating. As if that wasn't bad enough, John started organizing family outings that didn't include me. They'd go to the zoo, amusement parks, or even just out for ice cream, and I'd only find out because they'd post pictures on social media. Once, I confronted Mom about it. Why didn't you tell me you were going to the zoo? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Oh, I thought you'd be busy with homework, she said, avoiding my eyes. I wasn't, I replied. You didn't even ask. Mom sighed. Emma, sometimes it's just easier for everyone if we keep things simple. Simple. I hated that word almost as much as I hated temporary. One particularly bad incident happened on Liam's 2nd birthday. Mom and John threw him a huge party, complete with balloons, a clown, and what felt like half the neighborhood. I tried to make myself useful, helping set up and making sure Liam didn't wander off. But when it came time to sing Happy Birthday, I realized something. They had a family photo station set up, but I wasn't in a single picture. Emma, can you take a picture of us? Mom asked, handing me the camera. I stared at her, dumbfounded. You don't want me in the photo? Oh, we just want one with the immediate family, she said, as if that explained everything. Immediate family. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but I swallowed my pride and took the picture. Later that night, I deleted every photo I'd taken. Petty? Maybe, but it was the only bit of control I had left. Things reached a breaking point when Mark got into trouble at school. He'd been caught cheating on a test, and the teacher called John in for a meeting. Instead of punishing Mark, John twisted the story to blame me. You probably distracted him while he was studying, he said, glaring at me across the dinner table. Are you serious? I shot back. I didn't even know he had a test. Don't talk back, John snapped. This family has enough stress without your attitude. My attitude? I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue because I knew it wouldn't make a difference. In this house, I was always the scapegoat. I started spending more time with Mrs. Carter, my teacher. She was the only adult who seemed to notice how miserable I was. One day, she pulled me aside after class. Emma, are you okay? She asked, her voice full of concern. No, I admitted. It was the first time I'd said it out loud. I'm not. She encouraged me to keep a journal and write down everything I was feeling. At first, it felt pointless, but soon, it became my lifeline. I poured my heart out onto those pages, writing about every slight, every insult, and every time I was left out. It didn't fix anything, but it helped me feel a little less invisible. It all started with a decision, one I made when I was 16. By then, I was tired of being treated like an outsider in my own home. John's constant criticism, Mark's pranks, and Mom's indifference had worn me down to the point where staying felt unbearable. I began working part-time at a local coffee shop after school. The pay wasn't great, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in years, control. For the first time, I had my own money and a small slice of independence. At first, John and Mom didn't seem to care. If anything, John was glad to have one less mouth to feed during dinner since I often worked late shifts. But when I started saving every penny I earned, they began to notice. One night, I was sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling numbers in a notebook, trying to figure out how much I needed to move out. Mark walked by, snatched the notebook out of my hands, and started laughing. Planning your escape, huh? He sneered. Give it back, I said, lunging for the notebook. What's the rush, Emma? Don't you love it here? His grin was pure malice. I finally grabbed the notebook back and shoved it into my bag. Over the next 2 years, I worked as many shifts as I could while juggling school. The coffee shop wasn't glamorous, but I liked my coworkers, especially Jessica, a girl a few years older than me. She'd moved out of her parents' house at 18 too and had a tiny apartment near downtown. You can totally do it, she told me one night after work. It's scary at first, but once you're on your own, you'll never look back. Jessica became my unofficial mentor. She helped me figure out how much I'd need for a deposit, utilities, and groceries. She even offered to help me find a place when the time came. For the first time, I felt like freedom was within reach. When I turned 18, I knew it was now or never. I'd saved up just enough to cover the initial costs of moving out. I started looking at apartments in secret, not wanting John or Mom to catch wind of my plans. Jessica came with me to a few showings, and after weeks of searching, I found a tiny studio in a rundown building on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine, or it would be once I signed the lease. I waited until everything was finalized before telling Mom and John. I knew they wouldn't be happy, but I wasn't prepared for how hard they'd try to make me stay. The confrontation happened at breakfast on a Saturday morning. I took a deep breath and said, I'm moving out. John looked up from his coffee, his expression a mix of amusement and disbelief. Don't be ridiculous, he said. You can't afford to live on your own. I've been saving, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I already signed the lease. Mom's face fell. Emma, you don't have to do this. We're family. Why would you want to leave? Because I can't keep living like this, I said, my voice trembling. I'm treated like a guest, or worse, a burden, in my own home. I need to leave. John scoffed. You're being dramatic. You have no idea how hard it is to live on your own. You'll come crawling back in no time." His words stung, but they only strengthened my resolve. I'd rather struggle on my own than stay here and feel like I don't matter. Mom started crying, which almost broke me. She begged me to reconsider, saying I wasn't ready, that I'd regret it. But I'd made up my mind. Moving day came faster than I expected. Jessica helped me pack my things, which didn't take long since I didn't have much. Most of my belongings fit into a few boxes and garbage bags. When I loaded the last box into Jessica's car, I looked back at the house one last time. It didn't feel like home anymore. It hadn't for years. Mark stood in the doorway, smirking as usual. "Good luck, sis," he called out. "Don't forget to write." I ignored him and climbed into the car. The first night in my new apartment was surreal. The place was tiny, with peeling wallpaper and a drafty window, but it was mine. For the first time, I could breathe without feeling like I was walking on eggshells. I sat on the floor, eating takeout, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. But freedom came with its own challenges. The first month was a whirlwind of figuring out how to pay bills, budget for groceries, and juggle my work schedule. There were nights when I ate ramen noodles for dinner and mornings when I woke up to find my sink leaking. But every struggle felt worth it because it was mine. I wasn't living under John's roof anymore. I wasn't invisible. One of the biggest surprises came a few weeks after I moved out. Mom showed up unannounced, holding a casserole dish and looking nervous. "I wanted to check on you," she said, stepping inside. The visit was awkward at first. Mom sat on my thrifted couch, looking out of place in my humble apartment. But as we talked, I realized something. She wasn't there to convince me to come back. She was there because she missed me. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said quietly. I wish things had been different." Her words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt like she saw me. We talked for hours, and while it didn't erase the pain of the past, it felt like a step toward healing. I was 22 at the time, living in my own apartment and doing my best to put the past behind me. I still saw Mom occasionally, but my visits home were rare and brief. John and Mark made sure I never felt welcome, and Liam, though innocent in all of this, was growing up surrounded by their influence. One day, out of the blue, Mom called me and asked if I could come by the house. "It's important," she said, her tone serious. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived, John, Mark, and Mom were sitting in the living room. Liam was playing in the corner, oblivious to the tension in the air. John gestured for me to sit down, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he began. His tone clipped. "I've been working on my will." The word "will" sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't expecting to be included in any grand inheritance, but I also wasn't prepared for what he said next. "I've decided to leave everything to Mark and Liam," he said, leaning back in his chair. "They're my biological sons, after all." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. For a moment, I just stared at him, trying to process his words. "So, I'm not included at all?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. John shrugged. "It's not personal, Emma. You're not my responsibility. You never were." Not his responsibility. Those words hit me like a truck. I glanced at Mom, hoping she would say something, anything, to defend me. But she just looked down at her hands, avoiding my gaze. "You've lived in this house for almost a decade," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've treated me like your personal scapegoat, but I thought I was still part of this family." John's expression hardened. "Emma, I don't owe you anything. You're an adult now, living on your own. This is about taking care of my boys." Mark, who had been silent up until this point, smirked. "Don't take it so personally, Emma. It's not like you were ever close to Dad." Dad. Hearing him call John, that made my stomach turn. I wanted to scream that John wasn't my dad, that he never had been, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Instead, I stood up and grabbed my bag. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "At least now I know where I stand." As I walked out, Mom called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and completely alone. Later that night, I got a call from Mom. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Emma, I'm sorry, she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know he was going to do that, didn't you? I shot back. You've been complicit in his behavior for years, Mom. You've stood by while he treated me like dirt. And now this? I tried to talk him out of it, she said weakly.
But he's stubborn.
That's not good enough, I said, my voice breaking. You're my mom. You were supposed to protect me. For the first time, she didn't have a response. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. A few weeks later, I heard from Jessica, my friend from the coffee shop. She'd been keeping tabs on me ever since I moved out, and I told her what had happened. You need to fight back, she said, her tone firm. Fight back how? I asked, feeling defeated. It's his money. He can do what he wants with it. That doesn't mean it's right, she argued. You've been part of that family for years. You deserve better than this. Her words stuck with me. For years, I'd accepted John's treatment as something I couldn't change. But now, I was starting to realize that I didn't have to put up with it anymore. I decided to reach out to my dad. We hadn't spoken much since he left when I was little, but I knew he had remarried and was living a few towns over. It was a long shot, but I needed someone in my corner. When I called him, he sounded surprised but happy to hear from me. Emma, it's been so long, he said. How are you? Not great, I admitted. I told him everything about John, the will, and how I'd been treated for years. To my surprise, he was furious. I should have stepped in sooner, he said. I had no idea it was this bad. Hearing those words felt like a small victory. For the first time, I felt like someone was willing to stand up for me. Dad invited me to stay with him and his new family for a while, and I took him up on the offer. It was strange at first, being around people who actually seemed to care about me. His wife, Karen, was warm and welcoming, and their kids, Ava and Logan, treated me like a real sister. It was everything I'd never had with John and his sons. One night, over dinner, Dad said something that stuck with me. Emma, family isn't about blood. It's about how you treat each other. And from what you've told me, John doesn't know the first thing about being family. Hearing that gave me the strength to move forward. I decided to cut ties with John completely. I stopped visiting, stopped answering his calls, and stopped letting his opinion of me dictate how I felt about myself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Mom tried to reach out a few times, but our conversations were always the same. She'd apologize, I'd tell her it wasn't enough, and we'd go back to not speaking. It hurt, but I couldn't keep letting her drag me back into that toxic environment. It all started with a phone call. I was at work, balancing 3 drink orders and cleaning up a spilled latte, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I let it go to voicemail, assuming it was spam. After my shift, I checked my messages. Hi, this is Elaine Brown, a lawyer representing the estate of Anna Caldwell, the voice began. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. It's regarding an inheritance. Inheritance? My first thought was that it had to be a scam. I almost deleted the message, but something stopped me. The name Anna Caldwell rang a faint bell. I remembered Mom mentioning her once or twice, a distant great aunt who lived somewhere in the countryside. But why would she leave anything to me? I called the number back, half expecting it to be a mistake. To my surprise, Elaine answered and confirmed everything. Your great aunt Anna passed away recently, she said. She left a significant estate, and you're listed as the sole heir. Sole heir? I repeated, stunned. Why me? She admired your independence and determination, Elaine explained. She mentioned that in her will. She believed you embodied the values she cherished most. I was speechless. I hadn't even known Aunt Anna, aside from a vague memory of meeting her once at a family gathering when I was a kid. She'd been kind but quiet, the type of person who seemed to blend into the background. I never imagined she'd leave me anything, let alone $8 million. The news spread quickly. Within days, everyone in my family seemed to know. Mom called me first, her voice a mix of shock and excitement. Emma, I just heard about Aunt Anna's will. I can't believe she left you everything. I can't either, I admitted. Are you okay? She asked, her tone unusually warm. This is a big responsibility. It was strange hearing her act concerned after years of feeling like an afterthought. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I kept the conversation short. John, predictably, was furious. He didn't call me directly. Instead, he vented to Mom, who relayed his complaints to me. He thinks it's unfair, she said hesitantly. He's saying Aunt Anna should have split it between all of us. All of us? I repeated, incredulous. She barely knew him. Or Mark and Liam. Mom sighed. You know how he is. Yeah, I do, I said. And I'm not sharing. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about standing my ground. Then there was Mark. He reached out to me directly, something he hadn't done in years. Hey, Emma, he began, his tone unusually friendly. Congrats on the inheritance.
That's huge.
Thanks, I replied warily, waiting for the catch. So, any plans for it? He asked, feigning casual interest. Because, if you need advice or anything, I've got some great investment ideas. I almost laughed. I think I'll be fine, Mark. Come on, Emma, he said, dropping the friendly act. You can't possibly need all that money. What about family? Don't you think we deserve a piece of it? No, I said flatly. I don't. The line went silent, and then he hung up. I wasn't surprised. Mark had always been good at taking without giving anything in return. The most surprising reaction came from Dad. When I told him the news, he was genuinely happy for me. That's incredible, Emma, he said. You deserve it. His support meant more to me than I could express. Thanks, Dad, I said, my voice catching. I don't even know what to do with it all. Well, he said thoughtfully, start by taking a deep breath, and maybe talk to a financial advisor. You've got time to figure it out. It was the best advice I'd gotten so far. Amid the chaos, I decided to visit Aunt Anna's house, which was now mine. It was a sprawling estate in the countryside, surrounded by acres of fields and woods. Walking through the house felt like stepping into another world. It was filled with old books, antique furniture, and framed photos of people I didn't recognize. In one room, I found a journal that belonged to Anna. Flipping through its pages, I got a glimpse of the woman she'd been. Strong, independent, and fiercely intelligent. One entry stood out. Emma reminds me of myself at her age. I see a fire in her that others overlook. I hope this inheritance helps her achieve the freedom she deserves. Reading those words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I felt truly seen. But of course, the drama didn't end there. Shortly after I returned home, I received a letter from a lawyer representing John. He was contesting the will, claiming Aunt Anna wasn't of sound mind when she made it. It was a baseless accusation, but it still sent me into a panic. I called Elaine, who assured me there was nothing to worry about. The will is airtight, she said. John doesn't have a leg to stand on. Still, the idea of going to court over this was exhausting. I'd spent years trying to escape John's influence, and now he was dragging me back into his mess. The court case was a circus. John argued that Anna's decision to leave me everything was unfair and out of character. His lawyer tried to paint me as a manipulative gold digger who had somehow coerced Anna into changing her will. It was absurd, but it hurt to hear. Elaine, however, was a powerhouse. She presented mountains of evidence proving that Anna's decision was deliberate and well thought out. In the end, the judge dismissed John's claims and upheld the will. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I was free, not just from John's control, but from the doubt and insecurity that had plagued me for years. It started with Sarah. Out of all of them, she was the last person I expected to cause problems. She'd always been more passive in John's games, but when she heard about the inheritance, she transformed. One evening, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a casserole dish like it was some kind of peace offering. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her tone sugary sweet. "I thought we could catch up." I let her in, mostly out of curiosity. We hadn't had a real conversation in years. She placed the casserole on my counter and started making small talk, asking about my new house and college plans. It all felt so fake, but I played along. After a few minutes, she got to the point. "So, I heard about Aunt Anna's will," she said, carefully watching my reaction. "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "It was a surprise." "Well, I think it's wonderful, she said, forcing a smile. And I know she would have wanted you to share it with your family. There it was. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean by share? I asked, already knowing the answer. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. Emma, I've supported you your whole life. I've always been there for you, haven't I? I think it's only fair that you help me out a little. I mean, $2 million isn't that much to ask, is it? I was stunned. Mom, this money isn't a reward for being there for me. Aunt Anna left it to me because she believed in me. It's not something I'm just going to hand out. Her smile faltered. Emma, don't be selfish. Do you know how much I've sacrificed for you over the years? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sacrificed? You let John treat me like dirt for years. And now you think you're entitled to this money? Her face hardened. You're making a mistake, Emma. Family is supposed to come first. That's rich coming from someone who let John and Mark treat me like I didn't exist. I shot back. She left in a huff, muttering something about how I'd regret this decision. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it was just the beginning. Next, it was John's turn. Unlike Sarah, he didn't bother with niceties. He called me out of the blue, his voice dripping with anger. I don't know who you think you are, Emma, he began, but you owe this family. You wouldn't even be where you are today without us. I almost laughed. You're joking, right? You made my life miserable for years, and now you think I owe you something? Watch your tone, he snapped. You wouldn't have had a roof over your head if it weren't for me. And don't forget, I was the one paying for your food and clothes. I couldn't hold back anymore. John, you never cared about me. You made that clear when you left me out of your will. Don't call me again. He hung up, but the calls didn't stop. Over the next few days, he left voicemail after voicemail, each one angrier than the last. He threatened to take me to court, claiming I had manipulated Anna into leaving me the money. It was absurd, but it still got under my skin. Then came Mark. He tried a different tactic, playing the victim. He texted me one afternoon, saying he wanted to meet up and talk things through. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop, and for a moment, he almost seemed sincere. Emma, I know we've had our differences, he said, fiddling with his cup, but we're still siblings. Don't you think Aunt Anna would have wanted us to share this inheritance? Siblings? I repeated. Mark, you spent years making my life hell. Why would I share anything with you? He sighed dramatically. Look, I know I wasn't the best brother, okay? But I've changed. I'm trying to make things right. I wasn't buying it. If you're really trying to make things right, stop asking me for money. His expression darkened. You're making a mistake, Emma. You don't want me as an enemy. Is that a threat? I asked, standing up to leave. Take it however you want, he said, his tone icy. The final straw came when John and Mark teamed up. I received a letter from their lawyer, demanding that I reconsider my decision to keep the inheritance for myself. The letter was full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. They were planning to take me to court. I called Elaine, my lawyer, in a panic. Can they actually do this? I asked. They can try, she said calmly, but they don't have a case. Aunt Anna's will is solid. They're just trying to intimidate you. Even with her reassurance, I couldn't shake the anxiety. The thought of facing John and Mark in court was overwhelming, but I refused to back down. This money wasn't just about financial security. It was about finally having something that was mine. In the midst of all this chaos, I found an unexpected ally, my cousin Rachel. She was Aunt Anna's niece and had always been closer to her than anyone else in the family. When she heard what was happening, she reached out to me. Emma, I just want you to know that Anna would be proud of you, she said. She left you that money because she believed in you. Don't let them bully you into giving it up. Her support meant the world to me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't facing this fight alone. The drama eventually reached a boiling point. John and Mark tried to take me to court, but the judge dismissed their case almost immediately. Their claims were baseless, and it was clear they were just trying to strong-arm me into giving them a share of the inheritance. After the case was thrown out, I decided to cut ties with them completely. I blocked their numbers, stopped responding to their emails, and made it clear to Mom that I wasn't interested in any more family drama. You can't just walk away from your family. she said during one of our last conversations. Watch me, I replied. Hi, Reddit. It's Emma again. You'd think after the court case was dismissed, my family would back off and let me live my life in peace. But no, they had to take things a step further, hiring a fake lawyer to send me a threatening letter. It was so ridiculous it would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. Here's how it went down. One evening, I came home from work to find a letter in my mailbox. The envelope looked official, with a logo that said something like, Wilson and Associates Legal Services. My stomach sank. I'd thought the legal battle with John and Mark was over, but here was another letter threatening to sue me if I didn't share my inheritance. The letter accused me of undue influence over Aunt Anna and claimed her will was fraudulent. They demanded I pay $3 million to settle the matter or face legal consequences. I immediately called Elaine, my lawyer, and read the letter to her. She listened patiently, then laughed. Emma, this isn't a real lawyer. This is a scare tactic. A scare tactic? I repeated, confused. Yes, she said. The language in this letter is amateurish, and the legal claims are nonsensical. I'll handle it. Elaine drafted a response, pointing out the glaring errors in the letter and demanding proof of their lawyer's credentials. Within a week, we got our answer. The so-called Wilson and Associates didn't exist. It was a scam cooked up by John and Mark to intimidate me. When I confronted Mom about it, she tried to downplay the whole thing. I'm sure they just wanted to get your attention, she said, avoiding eye contact. My attention? I snapped. They hired a fake lawyer, Mom. That's not just unethical. It's illegal. Emma, they're desperate, she said, as if that excused everything. Desperate doesn't justify harassment, I replied. I'm done with this family, and I meant it. I told Elaine to send one final letter warning John and Mark that if they tried anything like this again, I'd press charges. That seemed to scare them off for good, at least for now. Part 8. A New Beginning. After cutting ties with my family, I threw myself into building the life I'd always dreamed of. The inheritance gave me a level of financial freedom I'd never imagined, but it also came with a sense of responsibility. I wanted to make the most of this opportunity, not just for myself but for others too. The first thing I did was invest in a house, a real home, not just an apartment. It was a cozy 2-story place in a quiet neighborhood, with a garden in the back and enough space for a small art studio. Standing in the empty living room on move-in day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Next, I bought a few rental properties with the help of a financial advisor. Jessica, my old coworker, came on board to help me manage them, and together we turned it into a small but successful business. It wasn't just about making money. It was about creating stability and a future I could be proud of. I also started volunteering at a local women's shelter. It was a way to give back, to help others who'd felt trapped or overlooked like I had. Eventually, I began donating a portion of my income to fund programs for education and job training. Seeing the impact of those programs was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life.